Hi, in this segment of the course, we will talk about ethics in research. Ethics are the professional standards that guide the research procedures that are acceptable for studying human beings. We as people, have given plenty of reasons to develop such principles and enforce them in rigid ways. Here are a couple of the more memorable examples. During the Second World War, there were a number of very scary processes going on in different places, especially in concentration camps, that involved medical research, including human participants. Unfortunately, these participants were not willing to participate in the project in these research projects. They were forced to participate, and they were exploited and tortured and brutalized to do so. Those were mostly the prisoners of the Nazi concentration camps, and one of the most memorable researchers conducting such projects was Dr. Josef Mengele, who was a prominent physician and a researcher at the university before the war began. And after the war started, he was given the power to conduct his research on site at Nazi concentration camps, most notably Auschwitz. And some of his studies involved injecting people with poison or contaminated water to see how their bodies responded to contamination, studying how quickly it takes for a person to die of hypothermia by submerging a prisoner in icy water and watching them float in that water until they died. Or the most probably gruesome of all, creating Siamese twins, which are conjoined twins, out of twins that were not conjoined. So these two girls were basically surgically conjoined or merged together into one body by Mengele and his research team. After about 3 weeks, they died. Mengele in general did a lot of research on twins because he found them fascinating, and a lot of that research involved very, very cruel things. So after World War II, the so-called Nuremberg Code, as your book discusses, was developed, which was a set of ethical principles to be followed whenever studying human beings, so that such atrocities would never take place. But they did take place, and they actually took place on our own continent, in our own country. The famous Tuskegee syphilis study was something that was conducted over a number of years, from 1932 to 1972 in Tuskegee, Alabama, and it was sponsored by the government, by Public Health Service and Center for Disease and Control. It involved infecting 399 male African American sharecroppers with syphilis, and also using a control group of 201 healthy men. And then the participants were observed to see how the disease progresses, develops, and proceeds to kill a person if the person is not treated for syphilis. Can you imagine this? So participants were denied treatment, and they were prohibited from seeking it elsewhere. In the end, 74 of the sick survived. Only 74 people of the 399 survived until the end of the study, because everybody else died. They were not provided treatment, which was easily obtainable. 40 wives were infected, and also a number of children were born with congenital syphilis. So later in the 90s, President Bill Clinton apologized officially on behalf of the U.S. government to African Americans, and specifically to the families and those affected by the Tuskegee syphilis study. But you can surely imagine this is a pretty gruesome thing to have done to people. And once again, it reinforces the need to follow ethical principles in research. Now, those experiments involved medical research, but the same principles apply to whenever you study people in social research, such as communication research. What are the ethical research principles? There are several. First of all, given what we just heard, the horror stories about the past experimentation, there should be no harm to participants. So not only physical harm, so you should not infect people with diseases, you should not hurt people, you should not kill people, but also you should not inflict any psychological damage on participants, any stress, or if there is stress, it should be minimal and it should be very, very well justified. So there should be absence of harm of any kind, physical or psychological or emotional. The second important thing is participation has to be voluntary. People have to agree out of their own will to participate, which is something very important when you think about a lot of times teachers will do research projects in classes, and they will ask their own students to participate in these research projects. Is that voluntary participation? Can you really say no to your own teacher who is going to give you a grade at the end of the semester? This is a very big ethical conundrum, and you should be aware that if there is a situation like this where your own instructor tells you to participate in research and they know whether or not you agreed to participate, you are placed in a tricky position and you really are not given the total freedom not to participate, because there's always a presumption that your refusal might somehow affect you. So instead, the instructor should find a way for you to either anonymously agree or disagree to participate, or go to a totally different class where students feel free to refuse participation if they want to. This is something very important. Now, voluntary participation should also be accompanied by informed consent. That is, that the participant agrees to take part in research knowing fully what they can expect from the study. So typically we provide a participant with a document called the consent form, which basically summarizes the procedures, the purpose, the procedures, the risks, the benefits of the study, and at the end there is a place for them to sign and a place for the researcher to sign, and both parties retain a copy of that document. If it is a survey, and especially if it's like an online survey, for instance, where I cannot see you face to face and I cannot get your signature, at the very least the survey should be preceded by a disclaimer form which simply states what the study is about, the risks, the benefits, and so on and so forth, and also contains a statement saying that by participating in the study, the participant agrees to the study and allows the researcher to conclude to use the data from this participation. Also, the important thing is that the participant should have the freedom to interrupt participation at any time. Another thing is that the participant's identity must be protected. So it's best when the researcher doesn't know who the data is coming from, if you can do so. This is called anonymity. And if they absolutely have to know who the data is coming from, so for instance, if I'm doing a face-to-face interview with you, I know what you're telling me. I know that the information that I'm receiving comes from you, so I can put the two things together. But I do not disclose this information and your identity together to other people. If I publish an interview with you, I publish it with you being covered by a pseudonym, being protected by a pseudonym, so that your identity is not revealed to other people who might be reading this. This is called confidentiality. Anonymity is always better. It's always better to not know which participant a given piece of information is coming from. But if you can't, then at least make it confidential. A great example of this, of a confidential research study, is the book called Pledged by Alexandra Robbins. This is a book about sororities. Alexandra Robbins went on campus. She went actually undercover as a college student, and she found a number of sorority members who were willing to participate in her study, in her ethnography study of sororities. And they gave her interviews that were very honest, very frank, possibly damaging to the sororities, about what was going on inside those organizations. So the participants' names and identities were changed, and she used pseudonyms for these women. But I'm pretty sure that she also changed some details about them, because, you know, if you read such a book, just by reading the details from their lives, you might be able to identify them. So she probably took additional precautions by changing some of the information about these women so that they would not be singled out by their sororities. You can only imagine what kind of consequences they would have suffered if this was revealed. The sorority names were also changed and protected so that it would have been difficult to really identify the participants. And just a few more ethical research principles. If you are deceiving somebody, if you are lying to somebody as part of an experiment, this should be really justified. So lying is never good in research, but if you have to lie to participants because otherwise you're going to reveal what your study is about, you have to follow this with adequate debriefing, that is fully disclosing to the participant what your study is about. And there are two parts of the debriefing. One is de-hoaxing and the other one is desensitizing. De-hoaxing simply means revealing all of the information, so removing the hoax from the study. But sometimes the study may involve some psychological harm on the participant, and that may require desensitization. So, for example, there was this very, very famous experiment in the 70s by Phil Zimbardo of the behavior of prisoners and prison guards in prisons, and it involved creating a mock prison on Stanford University campus. And it involved recruiting students to be both prisoners, either prisoners or prison guards. That study involved a lot of psychological harm. Students incurred a lot of stress, trauma even, or post-traumatic stress from that study. And so the researchers had to closely follow these participants for a long time, make sure that they are psychologically sound, provide them with counseling to make sure that they feel psychologically okay. And so this is desensitization. It's something very important. Whenever there is some kind of stress involved or some kind of harm involved, you have to make sure that you desensitize your participants at the end. And finally, your research has to be justified by the fact that it's good for the society. So, if you are conducting research on the best ways to manipulate public opinion, for instance, so that they vote for a given political candidate, is that ethically sound? Are you doing something that's going to help people, that's going to help our society? Or if you're doing marketing research that is telling people, that is looking for ways to best manipulate people to buy products, is that good for society? Is that good for the people? So this is something you always have to ask yourself. What is the purpose of this research? Is it good for society? And to ensure that these ethical research principles are followed, the National Research Act in 1974 introduced the so-called Institutional Review Board. This is the body of people that is present at every single university campus and large research institution that reviews all research projects involving human and animal subjects. So whenever I do a research project, before I conduct it, before I'm allowed to do it, I have to submit it to the internal review board, and a group of people reviews it to make sure that I follow these ethical principles that we discussed earlier on. And also a little bit of information about ethics of research reporting. And this is something important for you because this applies to you in your paper that you're writing. Make sure that you avoid plagiarism. Document every source. Do not fall into the trap of writing something and forgetting to document it, because then you're still going to be accused of plagiarizing it. Report truthfully. Do not make up stuff. There are cases of researchers that actually made up their data and they lost everything after that. If anybody discovers that a researcher plagiarized information, that the researcher invented data that didn't exist, that's the end of that person's career. And also remember, protect your participants in reporting. Change their identity as much as you can, not only the name, but also details of their lives, to make sure that nothing is revealed and nobody can identify them, especially if we're talking about sensitive information, just like this example of the sorority book by Alexandra Robbins. So in sum, these are the basic research principles that you have to follow, ethics principles that you have to follow with any study. And now I want you to move on to some activity work that comes after this video, so that you can apply some of this knowledge discussed in here.